Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Face with me, Azad Ali. This week we'll be looking at the Middle East peace process, the deal of the century as labelled by President Donald Trump. In the studio with me, Nasim Ahmed, political analyst for Memo, will be discussing the response of the Palestinians and what this means for them. So Nasim, thank you for joining us. This peace plan by Trump, the deal of the century, what do you make of it?
Well, peace plan, as many of us know, is never been about achieving peace in Palestine. They're really part of a structure to advance Israel's colonization and takeover of Palestine. That's been the case from 1947 UN partition of Palestine to the Oslo Accords, to Trump principles, and now to Donald Trump's deal of the century. Every single one has enabled Israel to expand its colonization and expansion through its diplomatic efforts by allowing Israel new negotiating positions, new baselines from which to advance its expansion of settlements. So with the peace plan is really part of the structure of allowing Israel to continue its occupation and colonization, entrench itself within Palestinian territory, which is supposed to be allow for the creation of the Palestinian state. So that's the logic within which peace plans exist, and many people don't want to admit that. They think somehow these plans are sincere, genuine, and they will lead to peace.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, it's what 70, 80 years since the occupation. And I think negotiations and discussions have been taking place since the 70s, a very long time, and really hasn't made the situation for the Palestinians any better. I mean, if we look at Gaza, it's still kind of surrounded. It's still an open-air prison, as was described.
Yeah.
So why do the Palestinians feel that these negotiations can work? Or do they? I mean, was anyone involved in the latest one?
I don't think the Palestinians do believe that peace plans will work. They may have been under that illusion from Oslo. You had the creation of the PA, Palestinian Authority. And again, that is seen as more of an instrument of colonization rather than a pathway towards Palestinian self-determination. And even now, I would suggest, Mahmoud Abbas and the PA have admitted. I mean, they've stopped any kind of security cooperation with the Israelis. They've dismantled the Oslo Accord. They've said they've done that. This is what they've said. So I think there's a realization. There's always been a realization that no, there is no genuine effort towards peace, because none of the basic rights of Palestinians have been accepted and endorsed, and it's always been given up or conceded for every single Israeli demand.
On their behalf.
On their behalf, yeah. So when you have a structure, a system set up where rights are being given up for demands and wishes of the Israeli state, of the Israeli government, that's no formula for peace. So I think it's taken a while, nearly 2 decades, for the Palestinians to come to that conclusion. When I say Palestinian, the PA, the Palestinian Authority. But this notion that it's never going to achieve any kind of peace, the formula which they've come up with.
Specifically, what does the Trump deal offer that's different from, say, the Oslo Accords or the previous American administration's peace plans?
Well, the difference is that it gives more to the Israelis. I mean, if we lay out the baseline of what's supposed to be a peace process, so-called peace process, is that there should be a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders and a just settlement to the refugee issue in recognition of Resolution 194, and East Jerusalem should be the capital of Palestine. So that's the international consensus on what should be the basic framework. That's the baseline. But with this peace plan, what it does is, of course, Jerusalem has been given up, it's been abandoned, and refugees will not be allowed to return to their territory.
So right of return,
return is gone. And as we know, the Palestinian state is simply a state within Israel. There's no borders with Jordan, there's no borders within Arab state. It's almost like a Vatican, a city, a country within a country. And within that, you will have Israeli soldiers roaming around Palestinian street. So even though they say a Palestinian state, it's not a sovereign Palestinian state. They will have no airports, they will have no borders with Arab cities, they will not have a military. So all these have been taken away. And on top of that, in order for Palestinians to get the resolution which plan has in mind. They have to abandon their pursuit of Israel in the ICC, International Criminal Court. They have to abandon any attempts to take Israeli officials to the ICC over Gaza and previous war crimes. So it's like an attack on the law itself. So Palestinians have to give up so much more than what they have to in order for them to even get the crumbs of this.
I mean, hearing what you've just said, I mean, it actually sounds quite horrific. The country's been occupied for a very long time, and it seems the only answer to their occupation is that you accept the occupation by any means necessary. That being the case, like how is it received by the other nations around Palestine, in particular the Muslim countries? How have they responded to this latest peace plan?
Yeah, so generally I would say, a bit of a silence actually. I think the reaction you would expect has not been there. The Arab League sat over the weekend and they dismissed the idea completely, but that's the Arab League. That's different to say, what's Saudi Arabia's position? What's the UAE's position? What's Egypt's position, more crucially? Individual countries haven't come out to condemn the peace plan, though the Arab League has. So within the Arab countries, there's a fear that we've seen warming of relations, ties between Israel and the Gulf countries, namely UAE and Saudi Arabia. So I think there's a sense that maybe they can buy the Palestinians out, and that's the fear. That I don't think will happen, but they will push for this plan to at least be allowed to take effect. With regards to the Europeans, again, contradictory statements. Individual countries like the UK have said, it's a good idea, let's give it a try. That's the kind of message they've given. But institutions like the EU and the UN as well, they've condemned it. So, they've reaffirmed what is the baseline of the two-state resolution, which is what I outlined before, 96 borders and other aspects. So it's not been as condemnatory. So that leaves
Do you think that the willingness to support the Palestinians, cause for their freedom and the right to return and all of that, do you think, in particular the Muslim world, if you like, do you think that's dissipating, it's going away?
Yes, and many say that, and I think that is a fear because of what's happening in the Middle East. There's so many other, I'm sorry to say, priorities now, what's happening with Iran, what's with ISIS, and a number of countries are failed states at the moment. And Israel, in its propaganda, uses that as a way to say, look, we can't have another failed state right on our borders. It's an Orientalist racist trope. Muslims cannot govern themselves. So this has, become almost accepted dogma within Israel, many Western policymakers, especially within the Trump administration. So that is a fear. Palestine, it's a small country. It's a century-old conflict. Let's find a way to just resolve this and move on to more important issues. But I don't think it's going to be as easy as that, because the issue of Palestine is so entrenched in the minds of at least people on the streets, the grassroots, people on the streets in the Arab countries, in Europe. And there's a sense that, this is one of the biggest injustices of our time, not because there's so much violence in there. I mean, like, for example, there's more violence in Africa during the apartheid system in South Africa. But apartheid became a global issue. Why? Because there's something about keeping people colonized and denied their dignity, which is seen as far worse than some of the barbarity we saw in, say, Congo, in Uganda, all various parts of Africa. So there's something about the nature of the crime itself, which keeps it in people's minds. So yes, it's not as brutal what's happening in Palestine as, say, what was happening in Syria and Iraq, but it's something about the nature of occupation, nature of denying people their historic rights, which resonates with people because of the centuries of colonization and expansion and ethnic cleansing.
I mean, if we just look at Gaza, the living conditions, how would you describe them? What is it like to live in Gaza?
Everyone has mentioned it is an open prison, and it's getting worse by the day. Israel just now announced that it will prevent the transport of cement and other essential goods to Gaza as a punishment for the Palestinians refusing the deal, as a punishment on the Palestinians for breaking up the Oslo Accords. So a diplomatic feud somehow is used to punish and deny Palestinians in Gaza, access to basic needs. So in Gaza, 45% unemployed. People are on the brink of starvation. So the worst is, the description is, as we know, it's an open air prison, and it's not getting any better. So what the Israelis have tried to do, or the Americans in this case have tried to do, is offer the Gazans a hope of more jobs in industrial business sector right next to Gaza, which will improve their lives if they are to accept this deal, which essentially means abandoning any hope of a sovereign Palestinian state and being able to really take control of their destiny and their life.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, I mean, the land is almost shrinking, and it's shrunk quite a lot, and the only way is like, we'll give you some economic stability, we'll give you a job, all of that kind of stuff. So it's like, it's left to the Palestinians to make a choice. You either want to have a life where you can work and pay and have a decent life, or you go for the land and we don't help you and everything else. These are the hard choices, it seems, that have been
and that will resonate with a lot of people, that will. I mean, you think of yourself, you're in a situation where you have to think about feeding your family, immediate necessities, those essentials. If they're not provided, hopes of political freedom is quite secondary in a sense, So, so many Palestinians would probably buy into that. But in the long term, I would suggest this is actually quite destructive for Israel itself. It's counterproductive for Israel's long-term security, if that's what it's looking for. Because
it can't be productive keeping the people like that. Okay, we're going to take a short break. Inshallah, we'll be rejoining the conversation after the break. So join me then. Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Face to Face with me, Azad Ali, and in the studio, Nasim Ahmed. So just before the break, we were talking about keeping the Palestinians in this way, in this occupied way, isn't going to be beneficial for the Israelis either. It's not going to improve their security to have people live in this desperate situation. From your analysis, I mean, how have the Israelis generally across Israel, how have they seen Trump still? How have they received it? Are they all behind it, or are there people actually seeing?
Yes, so I mean, to just add to some of the details of the deal, Trump's basically given every single wish list which the Israeli right wing has requested. From Jerusalem to the Golan Heights to the annexing the settlements, every single one has been offered. But even then, I mean, there are sections within the Israeli right, especially the settlers, far right of the settlers, if you can call them even, if they're offered. They've rejected the deal on the basis that it does say Palestinian state. There is though it's fractured, though it's fragmented, though Palestinians would dismiss any notion of the type of state which has been offered to them, Israeli right-wing like Naftali Bennett, who will be in a coalition most likely with Netanyahu, they've rejected the deal on the ground that it says something along the lines of a Palestinian state. It's not enough. The Israeli position has always been that there should never be a Palestinian state. If they can have self-rule, but it has to be something below a state. So you'll have little enclaves in sections of Jerusalem, in Ramallah, which Palestinian, if they want to call it a state, it's a state, but it's not really a sovereign state. So
Naftali benefits of a state.
Without the benefits of the state. So Naftali Bennett, many other settler organizations have rejected the deal or have dismissed the deal, saying no, we will not accept it because it still recognizes something in the form of a Palestinian state.
What about within Israel? Are there any organizations, any protests, any campaigns to actually realize the rights of the Palestinians, like things like the right of return and 1967 borders?
No, within Israel, yes, there are Palestinians who are resisting the deal. They have been protesting. Why? Because they are part of this peace process. They will be either pushed out into a different state, annexed and given to a new Palestinian state. But the interesting thing is that the Israeli right themselves, they actually want Palestinians to be part of Jordan. That's the vision they have. They don't want a Palestinian state. The reason they don't want a Palestinian state is because they want to have a greater Israel. Or they believe that they have a historic right, religious right to the whole of Palestine. And the Palestinians who are in Palestine, have been there for centuries, are actually the settlers. They're the occupiers. And a solution which they are aspiring for is a solution where the 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank become part of Jordan. And that's the offer that's now becoming more and more powerful and accepted within and amongst Israeli.
It's gaining momentum in Israeli politics. I mean, we talked about some of the Muslim countries. What about Egypt? I mean, Egypt and Jordan, they're the closest linked to the Palestine state. How have Egypt responded? I mean, what was the political response and what's the response you're reading on the ground?
Yeah. Egypt has not come out forcefully, partly because Egypt, as you know, has a peace deal with Israel. Egypt is dependent on American security. It relies on US donor money. Because of that, it's not resisted or rejected and denounced the deal in the way you would expect. Even though, as I said, the Arab League had a meeting, and within the Arab League, but that's a different institution than a nation state coming out strongly and forcefully saying this deal is dead. So Egypt, I think, is open to the idea. And this deal has a 4-year lifespan, so within that time, I think the Egyptians, Jordan has come out, by the way. Jordan has rejected the deal, partly because Jordan has around 4 or 5 million Palestinians within the country, so that they've had to reject the deal. But I think Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE will see it out, see what happens in the next 4 years. Maybe the Palestinians will cave. Maybe the Palestinians will accept the 50 billion payout, which compensation or blackmail, you can say, which has been offered to them. Maybe they will accept it. Who knows?
What's puzzling? I mean, what does Trump? I mean, why is Trump going for this kind of deal? I mean, what do the Americans get out of this thing? I mean, why can't they be fair?
So I think we should separate the American interest from Trump's interest, and the current administration is surrounded by officials, people like Jared Kushner, people like Greenblatt, people like Friedman, who is the US ambassador to Israel. These are actually, they actually support the settlement enterprise. They're very close to Israeli settlers and the right wing, and they have a very, messianic idea of what Israel constitutes, and they dismiss any idea that the Palestinians have a right to self-determination in Palestine. They reject this completely because of their right-wing extreme views on the issue. So the people Trump has asked and requested to draft and become the architect of this deal, like his son-in-law, they don't, first of all, believe that Palestinians have a right to self-determination, but they are trying to offer a deal which they can get away with. Say to the international community, look, we've offered the Palestinians a deal which Palestinians can never accept, because that's always been the case. A deal they'll never accept, and this deal will be used by the Israelis, as was the case before, to mount a new assault, diplomatic assault, and say, this is now our negotiating position. You want anything more?
So basically the baseline and the goalposts keep changing.
Every peace deal is a way to change
and the Palestinians are framed as not accepting a peace.
And the rejectors. They're the rejectors of peace. And that's the diplomatic game that's been played from 1940, from the Balfour. Balfour, actually, if you remember, offered a Jewish homeland, which is not a Jewish state, but the early Zionists seized on the idea of a Jewish homeland and created a state. 1947 US partition plan. They seized on the plan and expanded the territory. Every single one is a means by which to mount an assault and expand their territory, not just physically, but also diplomatically. Say, this is now our new baseline. This is what we have a right to. That's always been the game.
I mean, you're monitoring quite a lot of this stuff. The Palestinians themselves, like your gut feeling and from your analysis, are they withstanding? Do you think they're going to resist? Are there other people? Are there ways that people can seek the justice that is quite obviously missing in this?
Like I said, there are many Palestinians that are suffering, and I think for them, they probably may take it, but many that won't. One of the demands within the deal is for all the organizations to disarm, like Hamas and other Palestinian resistant organizations to disarm. That's very unlikely to happen. That's one of the conditions on the treaty. But unfortunately, I think the direction of travel for the Palestinian issue, as we said before, it's not looking very good. There's an assault globally on international legal order. What constitutes international law is somehow being trampled on, whether it be in China, whether it be by Russia, in Myanmar, and of course in Israel. The respect for the law has been dismissed. And US came out and said that. Pompeo only 3 months ago said the international law would not lead us to peace in Palestine. Right and wrong when it comes to things like settlements is not something we can accept, you know. So he basically dismissed the idea that law plays any part within Palestine. So given that's the case, I think you know, the amount of suppression that's taking place in Germany, in the US, in the UK, on the Palestinian activists and what they can say, what they can't say on the issue, I think, you know, there will be an attempt to silence people about the atrocities in Palestine.
Would it not also backfire? I mean, if you take back the BDS movement during the South Africa time and everything, there was a lot of pushback against it, a lot of stifling it. But it did gain momentum. Do you think there's a possibility that, you know, for the Palestinian cause, these things can gain a momentum? Yeah.
In the long term, one of the things I think will definitely happen, the one-state model will become more acceptable and will be seen as the only solution on the ground.
I mean, so if we're honest, there can be no two-state.
Of course, that's the
physically not possible.
Yeah, that's the direction of travel at the moment. Now, I mean, I know a number of Israelis who are very pro one-staters, and they want to now build a community and a coalition between Palestinians and Israelis to say that, look, the two-state model is dead now. Let's get back to a one-state model, which Palestine has always been. Palestine has always been a one state. Jews, Christians, Muslim, living in that state, a civil democratic state, not an ethnic, national, religious state. That's never been the case. And we've tried 100 years of trying to split Palestine into different communities, different racialized groups, and it's not worked. So the two-state model, I think, has died, if it hadn't died a long time ago. And the one-state model will gain momentum, partly because, as you mentioned, I think there's something about occupation, racism, denying people their basic civil and political rights, which resonates with people. So the BDS people, though Israel will attempt to suppress it, it will gain momentum, and that will be the only solution left on the ground. So in many ways, you know, in some ways, it may, you know, backfire.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad. I mean, it's been going on for so long, and there's so many discussions about it. We're coming to an end. I mean, in terms of your immediate kind of analysis, the groups like Hamas and Palestine Authority and others, is there a chance that they'll start to work together a little bit more as well?
Yeah, so they have spoken of working together. They have actually made statements saying Hamas, PLO, and the PA, they should, you know, come together and stand against this deal in a unified way. And that is what I expect. You know, I think the Palestinian division has gone on for too long, and they need to find a way to come together and resist Israel, not just physically in Gaza because of the constant bombardment, but also diplomatically. And diplomatically, unless they come together, they will not be accepted as a force. You know, so there's always the argument, oh, there is no Palestinian to speak to. There is no Palestinian leadership because they're fragmented themselves. Which Palestinian are we speaking to? So that narrative has been exploited to some degree. So I think the Palestinians will put that division aside and come together.
Right. Jazakallah khair for your time. We have come to an end. Hopefully you've enjoyed the discussion, and I'll see you next week, inshallah. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.